Russia's Su-34 seemed to be custom-made to dominate the skies over Ukraine. The multi-role fighter was more advanced than anything that Ukraine had in its aerial arsenal when Russia invaded Ukraine, and it, combined with Russia's other fighter jets and bombers, should have been enough to put the air superiority debate to bed within weeks of the war starting. That's not what happened. The Su-34, while not a non-factor, isn't the dominating fighter jet it was supposed to be in Ukraine. And the reason why is Ukraine exploits a fatal weakness in the Su-34. The code has been cracked, and there's nothing that Vladimir Putin can do to stop the losses. That's according to US Army and US Air Force veteran Wes O'Donnell, who opened a January 4th video with the obvious question, why does Russia keep losing its Su-34s? We'll answer that question later in the video. What is clear from the outset is that what the Su-34 was supposed to be for Russia and what it actually ended up being are two very different things. Russia built the Su-34 for exactly this type of war, O'Donnell declares. Not a counterinsurgency, not Syria, a high-intensity state-on-state fight against a pure military with layered air defenses. Media outlets certainly seem to align with that opinion, with Militani claiming as recently as September 2024 that the Su-34 represented an existential threat to Ukraine. It points out that Russia used them for one of their intended purposes early in the Ukraine war, as Su-34s entered Ukraine and started dropping dumb bombs on airfields and hardened targets to weaken Ukraine's defenses. Guided missiles such as the Kh-31, the Kh-59 can also be loaded into the Su-34 and have also been used by Russia to terrifying effect. But even with this so-called existential threat, even Militani says that Russia couldn't use its Su-34s to drop dumb bombs for long, all due to Ukraine's air defenses. Ukraine didn't fight the war in the skies the way Russia expected, which is a topic we'll explore in more depth later in the video. Forbes also agrees that the Su-34 is Russia's best precision bomber, which has led to it gaining a near monopoly on precision strikes using guided weapons out of all of Russia's aircraft. And the jet's specifications certainly seem to suggest that it should be a nightmare for Ukraine. Odin covers the basics, noting that the Su-34 has 12 hardpoints on its wings, along with a capacity of about 8,000 kilograms or a little over 17,630 pounds, which is ideal for carrying the dumb bombs we mentioned. It can reach a maximum speed of 1,900 km per hour, which is about Mach 1.5, and can be equipped with missiles, rocket weapon systems, and bombs, all of which add to the power of a 30mm GSH-301 single-barrel autocannon that can fire between 1,500 and 1,800 rounds per minute. By all accounts, the Su-34 is a formidable foe for Ukraine, a jet advanced enough to stand above anything that Ukraine's air force had in its inventory when Putin invaded. It was meant to be Russia's answer to sustained strike warfare, O'Donnell claims. Far from being a disposable aircraft that Russia could sacrifice in Ukraine for no other reason than to force Ukraine to burn through air defense ammunition, the Su-34 was supposed to be one of the pillars of Russia's strategy for aerial superiority. In Russian doctrine, the Su-34 was the aircraft meant to be flown daily, the platform that sustained pressure along the front, and the tool that shaped battlefield conditions through constant presence rather than occasional spectacle, O'Donnell says. It all sounds very impressive, but it's not a reflection of the reality in Ukraine. Far from being Russia's most dangerous aerial asset, the Su-34 has become one of its most destroyed. Defense and Aviation highlighted that fact in a January 9th roundup of Russia's military losses so far in the Ukraine war. It claims that Russia had lost 174 airplanes by January 1st, and of those, the Su-34 was the second hardest hit. It accounts for 40 of the lost aircraft, with only the much older Su-25 at 41 lost standing ahead of it. That's a terrible statistic for Russia. These are fighter jets built around 20 years apart. The discrepancy between their price tags, which are $36 million for an Su-34 and $11 million for an Su-25, according to armedforces.eu, is so massive that you could make a very persuasive argument that 40 downed Su-34s is far more damaging to Russia than 41 lost Su-25s. It'll only take one more destroyed Su-34 for Ukraine to even up the numbers after all. Amazingly, the losses Russia has experienced may be far higher than Defense and Aviation claims. Ukraine's own Ministry of Finance claims that the number of destroyed Russian aircraft is 434, not 174. It seems that 40 lost Su-34s is the agreed-upon number, as Defense Express also reported it on January 18th. However, these may just be confirmed losses, and the real number could be higher. So what does all of this show us? It's not that the Su-34 is a bad aircraft, far from it in fact, as the specifications that we've shared show you that it would do well in the kind of war that Russia expected to fight in Ukraine. But being a multi-role fighter comes with its fair share of baggage. As the name implies, multi-role fighters serve several roles, and Russia is using the Su-34 for everything that it can think to use it for. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, as that's a problem that we're going to explore a little later. Let's come back to the question that O'Donnell asked. Why does Russia keep losing its Su-34s? There are a few reasons, and they start with Ukraine refusing to fight the kind of war that Russia expected it to fight. In fairness, Russia didn't really expect much of a war to begin with. Putin thought that he could use a shock-and-awe campaign to blow through Ukraine right up to Kyiv, and Russia would face little opposition in doing so. Russia's strategy was so clear that March 2022 saw King's College London publish a piece in which it suggested that Putin might be following the Nazi blitzkrieg format of warfare. That was a misnomer, the college said, though there are certain similarities on the aerial front. Russian planners expected Ukraine's air defenses to collapse quickly, assumed command and control networks would fracture under pressure, and believed that their strike aircraft would operate with relative freedom once the opening phase of the invasion concluded, O'Donnell says. In other words, Russia expected to come up against static and vulnerable air defenses that Ukraine would deploy in a desperate effort to retain superiority over its own airspace. Russia would bulldoze right through, which does sound awfully blitzkrieg-like. Russia's main problem during the early stages of the invasion was that Ukraine didn't pursue air superiority. It focused on aerial denial. Knowing that Russia's air force was superior both technologically and in terms of sheer numbers, Ukraine instead focused on denying air superiority rather than trying to claim it for itself. Movement, rapid responses, and clever layering were keys, and Russia's Su-34s had no answers during the early stages of the war. The Atlantic Council sums up things nicely. It says that Ukraine deployed Soviet-era air defense systems such as the S-300 and Buk-M1 surface-to-air missile systems as an initial layer for Russia's planes to try to bypass. Many didn't, and the reason for that was that Ukraine used shoot-and-scoot tactics that saw it launch missiles at Russia's aircraft before quickly turning off radar systems and moving to new locations. The systems we just mentioned were mobile enough to make that possible, and Ukraine took full advantage. Russia has no answers. By the time Putin's forces could identify where an air defense missile had come from, the system that fired the missile was already gone. It was attacking from elsewhere, creating a confusing and controlled mess of air defenses that Russia never expected to face. Russia responded to this unexpected strategy by ordering its aircraft to fly low. That was a big mistake. Low-altitude flight requires care and precision because there are obstacles near the ground that aren't present in the open sky. Those obstacles cause slower flight, which in turn makes Russia's fighter jets susceptible to attacks from anti-aircraft artillery and shoulder-fired air defense systems such as Stinger missiles. These are weapons that are better suited to dealing with helicopters and other low-flying aircraft rather than fighter jets, but they were taking out Su-34s and other airframes with ease due to Russia's low-altitude flying. Ukraine had brilliantly baited Russia into a trap, and the Kremlin's military commanders fell for it hard. This environment was far from what an Su-34 should be operating in, and it ended up being a killer for this type of jet and many of Russia's other airframes. Ukraine's goal was to make the sky hostile, O'Donnell says. Russia's response was to ask its Su-34 pilots to do too much, too often, and too close to the front, which brings us back to the whole multi-role problem we mentioned earlier, which is also our second reason why Russia's Su-34 has been exposed. It's not about pilot incompetence or platform faults, it's about role mismatch. That's according to O'Donnell, who says that Russia has learned the lessons from its early Ukraine war experiences. Russia continues to rely on the Su-34 as a multi-role workhorse, often pushing the aircraft beyond what its original designers intended, O'Donnell says. Russia is trying to force a square peg into a round hole, and it keeps trying, no matter how many times the pegs get pushed so hard they end up being destroyed. The Su-34 is supposed to be used as Russia intended to use it when Putin launched his invasion. The jet is at its best when serving as a frontline bomber that delivers both guided and unguided missiles close to the line of contact. But it's become so much more than that since Ukraine's unexpected defensive strategy made this primary use impossible. Multi-role has become every role for Russia. Su-34s now launch glide bombs from as far behind the combat lines as possible. Crazily, Russia is also using its Su-34s as a substitute for degraded or lost intelligence and reconnaissance airframes, O'Donnell notes. It's all too much for the Su-34 to handle. Keep watching and we'll explain why. But for now, let's stick with the usage of the Su-34 as a reconnaissance airframe. Russia has been forced into adapting the Su-34 for a reconnaissance role because Ukraine has been targeting Russia's Beriev A-50s. In June, when Ukraine pulled off the amazing Operation Spiderweb drone strike on several Russian air bases, a pair of A-50 airborne early warning and control aircraft was shown via video footage to be among the casualties, Flight Global reports. These are Russia's premier surveillance and reconnaissance airframes, and Putin is quickly running out of usable A-50s. It only had 6 left back in February 2024, per Interesting Engineering, and 2 more going down afterward essentially meant that Russia's eyes in the skies were being closed. Enter the Su-34 in its new role as a reconnaissance aircraft. On July 10th, a little over a month after Operation Spiderweb, Army Recognition reported that Russia was adapting some of its Su-34s to serve as tactical reconnaissance platforms. On one hand, this isn't some unknown phenomenon, the outlet points out. Even F-16s have been used for this purpose, and fighter jets that conduct surveillance have the advantage of being able to fly quickly enough to get in and out before anybody knows that they're even there. In theory. In practice, Russia's use of Su-34s for reconnaissance means that it built predictability into an airframe that thrives on speed, maneuverability, and its intended use of launching attacks that seem to come out of nowhere before it flies away. All of that goes away when conducting reconnaissance, because the aircraft has to follow specific routes to keep an eye on what the enemy is doing. And once the enemy knows that the fighter jet is in the skies, and following the same routes every day, a very big target appears. Repeated use in the same roles pushes Su-34s into predictable flight corridors and operating altitudes that Ukrainian forces have had years to study, O'Donnell says. Sure enough, patterns start to emerge that, once identified, make it easy for Ukraine to take down an Su-34. All it has to do is get an air defense system in the right position and wait for the next flyover. Then, boom, an Su-34 goes down. We saw this very strategy in action in September 2025. After yet another of Ukraine's Su-34 takedowns, the new voice of Ukraine spoke to military expert Mikhailo Zyrikov, who explained that Ukraine likely identified the Su-34 pilot flying predictable routes and may have even purposefully given that pilot the impression that it was safe to do so. And you know, when there's no resistance, people on the front, the pilots in this case, lose some vigilance, they lose caution. That's why an ambush by the Ukrainian military was only a matter of time, Zyrikov explained. It seems that Ukraine has become a master of allowing Russia to believe it has found a safe zone until the time comes for the safe zone to become a kill site. Russia has another problem, which is that Ukraine doesn't just shoot down Su-34s, it destroys them on the ground too. You'll find out why that matters in a moment. But first, there's another reason why Ukraine is doing such a good job at taking out Su-34s, and it has something to do with an aircraft that arrived in Ukraine in August 2024, the F-16. Increasingly, Russian crews also face the risk of interception by Ukrainian fighters operating with targeting data supplied by Western sensors, like Ukraine's F-16 using Link 16, O'Donnell points out. It's another situation for which Russia didn't account, just like Ukraine's aerial denial strategy, and it's thrown the use of Su-34s for a loop. Western fighter jets were never supposed to arrive in Ukraine, and especially not any that could present a threat to Putin's jets. Russia even made the arrival of these jets one of its many so-called red lines, which are lines that, if crossed by Ukraine or the West, would supposedly bring about an escalation of the war. But far from an escalation of the Russian attack, F-16s arriving in Ukraine just made it easier for Ukraine to track and destroy Su-34s. Now, F-16s don't do this kind of work often. Ukraine generally uses them to defend against Russia's many drone and missile attacks, in addition to using them to strike targets on the ground. But every so often, an F-16 takes on an Su-34, and there seems to be at least one occasion where the F-16 came out on top. October 12th brought with it reports of just such an occasion. On that date, Forbes reported that Russian military bloggers were going crazy about what they claimed was an instance of an F-16 shooting down the far more modern Su-34. Ukraine's F-16 pilot reportedly pulled off the feet about 50 kilometers or around 30 miles from the front lines, and both the Su-34 and its pilot were destroyed. The military bloggers raged, claiming that Putin needed to fire his generals because they were incompetent. Frankly, they may be right. As we've seen time and time again in this video, Russia's Su-34 woes are caused by how it uses its jets, rather than by any major faults with the jets themselves. And that brings us back to a point we mentioned earlier in the video. Ultimately, Russia is losing so many of its Su-34s because it's trying to do too much with them, in an environment that punishes repetition, O'Donnell says. For Ukraine, the strategy now is less about shooting down Su-34s, though it will do just that when it gets the chance, and more about making every single sortie that one of these jets flies as expensive for Russia as possible. Remember, we told you earlier that an Su-34 costs $36 million to build. That alone makes for an expensive aircraft to replace, and Russia is spending big to get more. In April 2025, Militani reported that Russian defense manufacturer Rostec had delivered a new batch of Su-34s to the Air Force. But we say batch, but we're not talking impressive numbers. Russia reportedly received 2 of these jets in 2025, just as it had in 2024 and 23. That's 6 new Su-34s and 40 that have been taken out if the numbers are correct. The math doesn't quite work out there. Still, about $216 million has been spent on replacement Su-34s since 2023, but that's not the only cost that Russia incurs from its overuse of these multi-role fighters. Each destroyed aircraft represents a much deeper erosion of combat power that cannot be replaced quickly or cheaply, O'Donnell says. The most immediate loss is the trained crews, he adds. And he has a point. It's not cheap or easy to train pilots and weapons system officers. Expenses mount up everywhere, from the cost of the training itself to the loss of time sustained whenever an Su-34 goes down. And Russia has to go rooting around for another pilot to take flight. Sandbox claimed that Russia had a pilot crisis as far back as March 2023, as many of its well-trained aviators had been shot down, only to be replaced by pilots who had gone through a slapdash accelerated version of training that left them in no way prepared to do anything with their aircraft that involved flight anywhere near the combat lines. Throw maintenance into the mix and you get another issue. An Su-34 that is being used for everything that Russia can think of is an Su-34 that very quickly burns through its finite flight hours. That would be a problem even if Russia were able to freely import components and parts needed to maintain its Su-34s. But Russia doesn't have that freedom due to sanctions. As losses begin to mount, maintenance units are forced to cannibalize airframes, stretching already thin support structures and reducing overall fleet readiness, O'Donnell reports. And what's happening to Su-34s that aren't flying? Ukraine has an answer to that question too. Russia's Su-34s aren't even safe when they're on the tarmac because Ukraine is using long-range drones, sabotage operations, and even direct airfield attacks that take place hundreds of miles away from the combat lines to destroy Su-34s in places where they're supposed to be safe. It did just that on July 1st, the National Interest reported. In a joint special operation, Ukraine attacked Russia's Marinovka airfield, where its drones destroyed 2 of Russia's fighters. Another attack on Mozorovsk air base damaged more Su-34s, though it isn't clear if any of those were taken offline permanently. Russia's Su-34s don't even have to take to the skies to be in danger. Ukraine has so much intelligence on Russia that it can attack them from almost anywhere that is in range of its drones and missiles. At the start of the video, we told you that Ukraine has exposed a fatal weakness in the Su-34. That weakness is simple: Russia. It doesn't know how to use one of its most important aircraft without putting it at constant risk of being destroyed. Ukraine is happily obliging Russia's failures. There are 40 downed Su-34s and counting. How long will it be before that number hits 41, 45, perhaps even 50? 40 destroyed Su-34s in less than 4 years suggests Russia will have hit 50 of these jets lost by the end of 2026, and there seems to be nothing that Putin can do about it. Russia also has to deal with Ukraine constantly coming up with new weapons that can hit its Su-34s wherever they may be. One of those weapons is the FP-1 drone. Cheap and quick to produce, Ukraine is producing 200 of these $55,000 drones per day, and they are a threat to anything in their path. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show if you want more analysis on Russia's failure to capitalize on even its best weapons in the Ukraine war. And thank you for watching.